Okay, welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be here, and thank you for having me.
Okay, so what do you prepare for us?
Okay, so I prepare a short presentation explaining client-side security threats, including and what is always most important, an actual demo of an attack, and then an explanation of why it's not covered, what we have with what we have today, and how should we prepare to this. So I'm just going to dive right in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. So the problem we want to talk today is that almost every website today will use client-side JavaScript in order to enhance the website. And client-side JavaScript will introduce a problem to any website using it for a mage cart, e-scheming, form jacking, or basically XSS, which I'm sure all of us know of. The first mention of such an attack, of a mage cart attack, was 2014. This is when we first found this problem. And ever since, we've seen it growing constantly, going up to a staggering 72% growth in attacks from one year to the other. When today this is a completely monetized attack vector, you can actually buy an e-scheming code or form jacking code. There are a lot of names for this attack vector. They're all new names for an old attack vector, which is XSS or client-side scripts. You can buy e-scheming code for as little as $250 on the dark web today, and you can actually get it with 24/7 support. This is just how commercialized this is. Now, we have multiple examples of attacks, and I'm sure you guys know a lot of the logos here, and I'm not going to waste your time talking about these attacks. I will mention specifically two of them which are interesting. The first is the Ticketmaster attack. The reason Ticketmaster is interesting is because the Ticketmaster attack was live for 3 whole years before it was detected, and it affected 800 e-commerce websites, which is unbelievable. Following closely by British Airways, which I'm sure almost everyone here know about, or probably everyone knows about. The reason British Airways is interesting is because this is the first time a GDPR fine was ever given due to a mage cart or form jacking attack. They received a fine, a very high fine, that was then reduced due to COVID circumstances. But now they're actually facing a class action suit. And that's enough history. Let's jump to an actual attack demo. We wanted to show you exactly how an attack looks like. So what we have here is we have a domain called ihacker.me. This domain is owned by Source Defense. And all we do with this is every time you send information to this domain, it will be displayed in a table view. Right now, as you can see, it's empty. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Headphone City, and I'm going to go through the procurement process. I've introduced here a client-side script that is infected by a JavaScript malicious code, very similar to the one used in the Ticketmaster attack. Now, before I provide credit card information, I'm going to check. I can see the domain is correct. I can see the nice lock icon. I can see the certificate is valid, so I'm going to provide my credit card information and place an order. Everything seems to me in order. I've made my procurement. I don't see any problems. But if we go to ihacker.me and refresh, then you can see that my username, my password, my credit card information, everything I've placed there was sent to a hacker drop server without being stopped by the website security parameter and without any alert to the user. Now, to understand why this happens, we need to consider what's happening to a user when that user goes to an e-commerce website or to a banking website and logs in. So when I go to my favorite e-commerce website, my computer is going to call a web server, and that web server will respond with HTML. At that point, I've actually covered the entire security parameter of the website. My call was encrypted using SSL. I went through a firewall and a WAF, and most probably a few other initials. But now that security perimeter is out of the picture and everything is happening on my browser. And what my browser will do is that my browser will call all the open source libraries used by the website. It will make calls to the CDN of the website loading their own JavaScript. It will call third-party services like analytics, advertising, chat services, basically everything we use to monetize off our website. And it will call fourth, fifth, and sixth party services. All of these will send JavaScript back to my browser in order for their services to work. Now, the problem with this is that the origin of JavaScript actually has no effect over the level of access it has to a page. So it doesn't matter if the JavaScript came from my CDN, if it came from an open source library or a fourth party. Once it's on the page, any script can do anything. And I do mean anything. Any script can change the content of the page, access every field, every form, and even record our keystrokes while we type in username, password, credit card information. And all of this is happening completely outside of our security perimeter, which hackers know. And now this is their favorite attack vector. So instead of trying to go through our firewall and our WAF and all of our security layers and trying to get information directly from our servers, the attacker will simply try to infiltrate to one of the external services we're working with and hitchhike from that server over to our page, taking information directly from the browser of each and every user without going through any one of our security perimeters. So let's talk a little bit about statistics. Okay, at Source Defense, we have basically a sales enablement tool that allows a prospect to scan his website and get data over the client-side scripts working on his website and the things they're doing there, basically showing an attack surface. So we've taken 1,000 of these reports, and we've done some statistics over what third parties are used and what they're doing on specifically finance and e-commerce websites. Now we can see here an example of a typical website. We have the main site using their own JavaScript. We have an analytics tool, New Relic, a tag manager, which is usually provided to the marketing teams, and then some third, fourth, and fifth party services. An interesting thing you can see here is that this website is using New Relic for analytics. This is usually done as a conscious choice. Usually, if you don't use Google Analytics, it's because you don't want Google to have access to your data. Not always, but usually. They're using New Relic, and still, as a fifth party, you see Google Analytics is still on the page, meaning it still has full access to everything happening there, and most likely, the website owner has no idea it's there. Now, if we look at the type of external scripts used on website, then for the most part, scripts are used for advertising, analyzing, and marketing. We see, what is this, 66% of our scripts are just trackers, meaning 66% of our scripts, all they need to do is read the content of the page and save a cookie. But if you look at what these scripts are actually doing on your pages, then you can see that almost 70% of scripts running on our pages are actually accessing all our forms and input fields. We see them listening to any button click or any click on the page at all. 32% of scripts are actually listening to every form submission, which is how the Ticketmaster hack happened. Now, I'm not saying that 32% of scripts are malicious or 68. What I am saying is that these services constantly abuse their power for their own benefits. The problem is, if they're abusing their power, then how do you know when a script is infected with something malicious or if it's just doing something you don't want it to do? Now, if you want a threat report done on your own website, you can go to sourcedefense.com/check-your-exposure or just scan this QR code. Let's talk about mitigation options. Okay, there are technologies out there that are used to fight this problem. Okay, before I specify the technologies, I'm not going to talk about any of the companies. I will talk about technologies. Obviously, Source Defense is the best company for this. But let's talk about everything we have. Some of the misconceptions around this is very important to understand. This is not a problem for big sites. Okay, actually, it's very likely as a small site that you can be infected by this, because as long as you're using the traditional tools, those are the main target for this sort of attack. And this is not something your WAF or your firewall can help you with, or patching your legacy code. This is completely external to your control. So at the end of the day, it's not a question of if form jacking is going to come your way. It's a question of, are you going to be ready for it? Which is what this whole presentation is about. We need to understand that having a client-side security program is a must in this day and age, especially during COVID, when such a big chunk of our business moved to the online. Now, talking about technologies either used or advocated to solve this problem. I start with sub-resource integrity, or SRI. I start with this because this has been very highly advocated for a very long time as a solution for this type of attack. And honestly, this is the least likely to help you. So sub-resource integrity, for anyone not knowing this technology, it's basically a simple way that allows you to create a hash from a JavaScript file and tell your browser, if the file that is coming back from the external server doesn't match my hash, reject it. So this is actually bulletproof change control. The problem with using this to try and solve problems with third-party scripts or open source libraries is that if you want to do this, you're going to need to have cooperation from your vendors. You're going to need your third parties to tell you when the file is going to be changed. You're going to need to have a hash for the new file, and you're going to need to coordinate pushing out a new version with your vendors. But even if you can do that, if you think for a minute about how these third-party vendors work, almost all of them are very, very user-targeted. And we've all seen this as users, and I'm sure this happened to you. If you go to your favorite e-commerce website and you look at a product, and it doesn't matter if you bought it or not, any website you go from this point on for the next week or so will show you ads of this or similar products. The reason this happens is because these services, they can react to us as users, and they can target us with the content they think we want to get. Same way you can target an ad, you can target a hack, by the way. But the important thing is that when you go to a website and get a personalized ad, that means that the JavaScript coming back from the server is actually personalized for your user group. You cannot create a hash from dynamically changing JavaScript. So though SRI is a very good change control method, and I will highly recommend using it for maybe your own internal scripts, I would not see this as a good solution for solving form jacking or Magecart or XSS. The next technology used out there are detection tools. And you have two different types of detection tools. You have your scanners. Scanners are basically robots that will scan your website externally. And if they seem to find something suspicious, they will let you know. There's a big plus here because it takes zero integration. You basically sign up for a service and you start getting regular scans, either once a month, once a day, once an hour, depending on how much you're paying and who you're paying to. The downside of this is that this is a point-in-time scan for a specific user profile or a group of user profiles, and it has a low probability of actually finding something. The next generation of scanners will actually provide you JavaScript to implement on your own pages, and they will scan in real time either a sampling or maybe even all of your pages. This has a much higher probability of detecting something because it will cover all user groups. It should be noted that as I said before, as we've seen on our statistics slides, a lot of our third parties are doing things that are abuse of power and that will look malicious. So you will need to sift through the false positives here. Obviously, the biggest problem with the detection tool is it is detection, meaning if you found the problem, you're going to need now to try to remediate the problem. You're going to need to incident response. You're going to need to let your users know. You're going to need to let the authority know, and you might get a fine. So at least in my view, you want to get prevention and not detection. We are in a COVID world, so to steal from the world of medicine, prevention is better than cure. Which brings me to content security policy, or CSP. This has been very widely advocated as a solution for this problem for a fairly long time. Content security policy is basically a whitelist solution. So you can tell your browser, here's a list of domains that are whitelisted to be loaded to my website. And here's a list of domains that I will allow to load scripts, and these can open iframes, and these can load media files, and so on. So you can whitelist all of your vendors. It is extensive work, but it will work. The downside here is that the fourth parties used by your third parties will be blocked. This might be good security-wise, but it will probably hurt the bottom line of those third parties because there's a reason they work with their fourth and fifth parties. Another problem here worth considering is that once a script is already on the page, it is possible to bypass content security policy if you know what you're doing. And if you look at most Magecart attacks, most of them were done by third-party tools. So if you look at Ticketmaster, for example, the attack was done through a chat service they were using. So obviously, this would have been whitelisted in their content security policy if they had one in place. The next technology out there is policy-based reflection. Policy-based reflection is a technology that was, well, unlike the others, this was actually created in order to solve this problem. And it's not an existing framework. What it does is it basically allows the website to specify which areas of the page a third party can access, which areas of the page a third party cannot access, and even if the third party can or cannot write to the page. So if you will provide the right policies for your third parties, then you can limit their access to anything you don't want them accessing, much like we have on our mobile phones. The advantages are, well, it's agnostic to third parties, so you don't need to consider and talk to your third parties to do it. And it provides you complete visibility to what's happening with your client-side scripts. You do need to remember that it might block third-party operation, and it is not supported by older browser like Internet Explorer, much like CSP. You do need to know what you're doing here, or work with someone that will know what you're doing, know what he's doing, sorry, in order to prevent breaking your script operation. I'm happy to take any question. And again, I remind you that you can get your own threat report created for your own website. At Source Defense, check your exposure.
Avital, thank you very much for a very, very interesting presentation. So let me see if I understood correctly. So you're telling us that 66% of the scripts present in a regular website are trackers, like Google Analytics or Facebook or whatever. And if I understand exactly, 68% from them are accessing or could access forms and input fields.
So 100% of them can access.
100%, yeah.
68% of them are actually accessing forms and input fields and tracking 32 are tracking form submission. A lot of them are doing a lot of what they're not supposed to be doing.
And basically, the web page is formed with various input from various third parties, and the hacker doesn't need to attack my web page. It's normally they're doing to the third party providers, and they could inject the code, and then they could have access and to control my web page and to collect the data that's inputted over there. Is that correct as a principle?
Yes, that is correct. They just hitchhike over the JavaScript that is already sent, and it is almost impossible to detect. For example, the British Airways hack, the hacker code inside the entire open source library that was used by British Airways to get that, the hacker code was only 15 lines of JavaScript inside hundreds of lines. So actually being able to detect it is almost impossible. And it's actually interesting because they keep evolving in complexity, and especially in the way they're protecting themselves. So some of the malicious code we found lately can actually remove itself from the content of the page after it was executed.
And basically, with your you've got a tool on sourcedefense.com. Check your exposure, so I can check over there my website and to see if there is some malicious code inside.
So if you sign up there, you will get a report saying which third parties we found on your pages and which activities from the activity that I showed in my statistics slide, we've seen them doing there. So you can see if you have scripts monitoring your input fields or creating forms and so on. And also see a nice daisy chain of your third, fourth, fifth, sixth parties on the page.
Okay, we got a question from Adriana Krista. Is there a particular vector/sector that is more vulnerable to attacks?
So no, because they're attacking vendors and not websites. They're not targeting specific industries. What they care about are websites that are transactional. So either website that has good, personal information that they can use, or information they can monetize. That being said, though it's not very typical for a mage card attack to target a specific website, the British Airways hack was actually targeted specifically for British Airways, unlike the Ticketmaster hack that affected 800 websites.
Well, it's interesting that in Ticketmaster you said the malicious code stays for 3 years.
Yeah, and I always think about that when people talk about SRI, because let's say you have change control, and for a chat vendor, it's not dynamically changing, and you can actually probably coordinate your version releases with them. But how do you know that whatever it is that you've just hashed isn't already hacked? I'm pretty sure that in the course of 3 years, that code was checked a few times. But trying to find 10 or 20 lines of JavaScript inside a whole mechanism, it's not doable.
Yeah, basically, I'm thinking right now, to the very famous SolarWinds attack, which basically, they attacked the SolarWinds, they injected the code into the patching update, and then they deploy it to, and they're in fact 18,000 companies. And this is a similar technique. So I'm managing to get access to the data, not attacking the source, but attacking a component of the source which is not under control.
Yeah, and actually, this didn't make as much noise as SolarWind, but I think it was back at the end of 2019 when a mage card attacker managed to infiltrate a few S3 nodes on Amazon and actually affected 21 or 23,000 websites, pulling in their JavaScript from there.
Very interesting. There is another question. Can you share can you share different techniques organizations are using to remediate these attacks?
So most organizations today don't have a client-side security program. This is, this has been on the rise in the last 2 days. 2 years. We are seeing a few organizations that already try to implement content security policy on their own. For the most part, a lot of what companies are doing is trying to do code review because before you put a code on the web page, they try to put agreements, contracts, and processes in order to make sure they try to remain secure. It is, I understand what they're doing it, but it is unfortunately pointless because once you have, if you check a point in time for a code that is loaded from a remote server, it could be 100% now, and 10 seconds after you've checked it, it can change and you wouldn't know. Now, these were good enough before we had privacy regulations like GDPR and all, all brother sister new regulations that came out. But now with these types of regulation where they specifically put the liability on the website owner if a third party that they introduced infiltrates and steals information from users, now you actually have to have an active program if you want to stay ahead of the curve. And again, I think the original fine for British Airways was around 220 million British pounds, and COVID got it reduced to 20 million pounds. And who's to say what's going to happen in the class action suit?
Actually, there is a kind of a scary perspective, for the website owners and for the clients in general, for the society in general, because if it's, I wouldn't say easy, but I think not too many of us were thinking that a web page finally could be penetrated in this way, which seems to be complicated. There's another question from Adrian Dumitrescu. What if one relies on third-party JavaScript library? Code review is no longer an option.
Exactly, which is why you would like to put something. You need to have a product or a technology working on every page. And well, I'm trying to remain vendor agnostic and not to go to what we do, but you wanna basically make sure you can control what your open source libraries and your third-party tools are doing on your pages. There are technologies out there today, Source Defense and others, and I highly recommend reading on those. I don't, even though it is being used, detection products are being used today, I would not recommend going down this path because honestly, and I don't think any regulation will differentiate between losing information for 10,000 users or 10 million users. At the end of the day, once you've been breached, then you're in trouble. And the fact that GDPR is already relating to this, PCI is not going to be far behind. They already issued a few articles talking about client-side scripts. So it is possible to control your open source libraries. It is possible to make sure you won't get hit with such an attack, but you need a client-side security program for that.
Sounds very interesting. Now, the last question: what does the future hold for client-side security?
And I've been saying this for 8 years. I think client-side security's future today is very similar to how we see WAFs and firewalls today. 8 years ago, I think it was around 8 years ago, when WAFs were just starting, almost no one had it, and the people who talked about it, most of them didn't even know what a WAF does. Right now, it's basically, it's unthinkable to work without a WAF. Most organizations don't have a WAF; they just have a cloud server that, or also has a WAF in it. And I doubt it will be anything different for client-side security. You're not going to be able to have a transactional website without having an active prevention component within 2 to 3 years from now.
Okay, and now there is one last one. This is a member of the CIO Council, George Lazar. Not using external JavaScript libraries, replacing them with internal libraries seems the only option, correct?
So in a perfect world, yes, but I think the last study I read states that over 70% of code on website is external to the website. But let's say you don't use any open source. And when you say open source or JavaScript library, you're talking about getting rid of jQuery and React, which are also open source libraries. But let's say you do everything vanilla, as they say, which is just pure JavaScript. Almost every organization today will have to use external third-party tools to stay ahead of the curve. You're not going to write your own analytics or marketing pixels or chat services. And if you are, then the amount of resources you're going to put into it are going to be staggering. And your competitors are going to be ahead of you because they're going to be using tools that have hundreds of thousands of dollars put into them in order to be developed. 10 years ago today, you wouldn't see a bank website with a third-party tool on the login page. Today, go to most banks, there's anywhere between 15 and 35 third-party tools on the login page on a bank website, not to mention e-commerce, where I've actually seen an e-commerce site with over 150 third parties on one product page. I don't think we're at a point where we can win the war with marketers over removing these tools from our websites, because at the end of the day, it's about our revenues.
Yep, sounds. Yeah, this is unfortunately kind of scary, but well, this is we have to think about it. So basically, if, you know, e-commerce grow very, very, very high in the last. There's 25%, so up to 40%. It's been said. So only in the last year, and due to COVID and due to this pandemic. So I guess there's a wonder word for the hackers. You know, they have a lot of space to move themselves and to penetrate those kind of. I mean, the e-commerce sector and the marketplace. Avital, thank you very much. Absolutely a very good and useful insight from yourself, from your side. And what can I say? I'm going to check my website very soon on your website to see if I'm safe or not. Avital, thank you very much. And we're moving on to an interesting panel of discussions. So I'm going to switch back in Romanian.